Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sackur. The UK Parliament is about to vote on the government's plan to trigger the formal process which will end in Britain leaving the EU. There is little doubt MPs will give Prime Minister Theresa May a green light. But much has changed since last June's Brexit referendum. The government has clarified its vision of what Brexit means, while President Donald Trump is shaking up global politics. Well, my guest today is influential advocate of Brexit, Conservative MP Dominic Raab. What place will Brexit Britain occupy on the world stage? Dominic Raab, welcome to Hard Talk.
Hi.
You are a Westminster MP who took the perhaps somewhat difficult to understand position that Westminster MPs having the right to give a green light or not to the triggering of this Article 50, you took the view that that was wrong and shouldn't be allowed. Why was that?
I took the view, as did all of the MPs who passed the referendum legislation by 6-1 in the House of Commons, that we gave this decision to the British people, and having done that, and by the way all parties agreed this at the time, we'd need to respect it. So no one minds having scrutiny. I'm on the cross-party Brexit committee, which is scrutinising every inch of Brexit negotiations, and everyone, I think, has agreed we should have a vote on the final deal. But let's not have any guises for holding up or frustrating the verdict by the British people.
There is going to be a vote, though, in the coming days in Westminster. You now welcoming the debate, because there is going to be a debate. We know that various opposition MPs, whether they be Labour or Scottish Nationalists, have specific amendments to put forward. It's going to be a lively, a passionate debate, and surely that's something you welcome.
Terrific, absolutely. And of course it'll be something like the 16th or 17th debate we've had on Brexit. So this is not about debate or scrutiny. I think equally every Democrat in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords will have their cards called. Are we really talking about scrutiny, or are some people trying to frustrate the will of the British people and delay or even scupper Brexit altogether? I don't think that will happen, but everyone will have to be accountable to the British people.
Everybody will be accountable, including yourself as a very prominent Leave campaigner. One of the reasons I think that so many Remainers are deeply bitter about the process they see unfolding is that they feel that you in the Leave camp never came clean during the referendum campaign about the kind of Brexit you wanted. And indeed, one can point to all of the quotes in which some of the most prominent Leave single market. And now, the table.
Stephen, I think that is almost wholly wrong. If you look, every time I was asked this question, Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, Gisela Stewart, all of us said, let me hold on, let me finish the answer before you can scorn it. We all said that we would be leaving the EU, we wanted to take back democratic control over our borders, our laws and our money, and that when asked the critical question on the single market, we said that we'd be looking for the best access we could get, but no one said that we would try and remain formal members of the single market, not at least amongst the top brass, and certainly I never said that.
Well, your version of no one and mine are very different. Daniel Hannan, a very senior MEP, influential voice just like yours in the Leave campaign, quote, "Absolutely nobody is talking about threatening our place in the single market." Owen Paterson MP, member of the Vote Leave campaign, "Only a madman would actually leave the single market." And one more, just for luck, Aaron Banks, one of the biggest financiers of the Leave campaign, quote, "Increasingly the Norway option looks the best for the UK." Norway, of course, having full access to the single market.
Exactly, but not a formal member of the single market, which precisely demonstrates my point, Stephen. But actually, if
I've just given you three quotes which run entirely counter to what you just told me about the nature of the Leave campaign.
Norway's not a formal member of the single market.
All right, so that's Aaron Banks. What about the other two? Only a madman, Owen Paterson said, would actually leave the single market.
We're not going to leave the single market in terms of having a trading relationship, but in terms of being a formal member. And I think if you look, and I was with Owen for a lot of the campaign, if you look at the detailed comments he made, not just pick a few quotes out of context, I think it'd be very clear, because we were pressed on this time and time again. And I remember discussing it on the campaign board of Vote Leave, which of course Aaron Banks was not a member of, and we all said it's clear you couldn't leave the EU and then by the back door come in, give up control over your immigration policy, not be able to conduct free trade negotiations outside of the EU, and then realistically, credibly be able to say to the electorate we'd left the EU. So we said we wanted the strongest possible access to the single market, but we wouldn't anticipate being formal members.
What we now have is the cliff edge scenario, something that people said Britain should try very desperately to avoid. Well, you say, here I go again. Explain to me why there is not now the very grave danger that in 2 years after the triggering of Article 50, Britain will be staring over a cliff edge, because there will be no negotiated, complex, new trading deal with the EU member states. And as a result, we will simply go to default WTO rules, and to everybody concerned, that represents a dangerous cliff edge.
Well, dare I say it, the pessimistic, gloomy doom-mongering that many in the BBC perpetrated during the referendum campaign, and they said that we'd have an immediate economic shock after a Brexit vote. That didn't happen. We are the fastest growing economy in the G7 for 2016. Employment at record highs, from Google to Apple to Nissan to Dyson. Fresh investment coming in. Just this week, Stephen, Weetabix confirming extra investment.
So all valid points, nothing to do with my question, but very valid points. I want you to address this point about the cliff edge in 2 years' time.
The goalposts of doom. Originally,
with respect, I'm just conducting an interview with you. You can't, when you interview with me, include every discussion that you've heard over the last year. I'm asking you a very straight question which is relevant today.
The forecasts about the immediate economic shock have all been demonstrably proven to be false. There will be a slowdown of the high level of growth we've got at the moment, fastest growing industrialised economy in the world, but it will not be nearly as bad as those forecasters predicted. And even, for example, let's take this seriously, someone like Kristin Forbes at the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England has said all of the uncertainty that had resulted in these very negative forecasts, their indicators are totally flawed. And that's why from the Bank of England to the IMF, not only have
I've heard what you said, and I have reflected on the question, and I've decided it doesn't at all. Didn't the Maltese Prime Minister, Mr Muscat, get to the heart of this when he said the other day, the UK's deal post-Brexit with the EU must be worse than the terms of its membership? He said, we can see no situation where whatever is negotiated ends up being better than the current situation that the UK has. Well, that's where the EU's position is today.
You've quoted the Maltese Prime Minister, and I'm quoting to you the German Finance Minister.
Well, I could quote you, if you want to play quotes, I could quote you François Hollande, who has said consistently the UK is going to pay a very high price.
Do we think François Hollande is going to be in the Elysee when we're doing these negotiations? But look, you're quite right. There is a range of different views. But from the Spanish Foreign Minister through to Michel Barnier, the chief negotiator, who has said, for example, on the vexed issue of UK financial services, he's pointed out, hey, hold on a minute here. Given that Britain puts in £1 trillion worth of finance into European companies, actually, if we turn around and have a rational, vindictive approach to these negotiations, yes, talking about beggar thy neighbour, protect, looking for the win-win. And the point I was making about Wolfgang Schäuble, and the same can be said for Angela Merkel and indeed Michel Barnier, is there is a shifting mood in Brussels which recognises actually there's a scope for a win-win here. And Britain needs to go into it with a generosity of spirit too.
Well, neither you nor I knows quite where these negotiations are going to go over the next 2 years, but one thing that you guys in the Conservative Party can shape is your vision of what a post-Brexit British economy should look like, whether or not you get this complicated trade deal which you claim could be done within the next 2 years. Wasn't it very interesting when the British Chancellor said, you know what we may well do over the next few years as a result of Brexit? We may completely transform our economy. We may become a sort of Singapore of the North Sea, heavily deregulated, with low tax, low public expenditure, a completely different sort of British economy. Is that what you want?
I'm not sure, Stephen, those were quite the words that Philip Hammond used.
I paraphrase, but not unfairly.
You're judging during your own course. Look, I think that when we had there were three things that we needed to do between the referendum and the start of Brexit negotiations. Stabilise the economy. Sure, for now, that's done. The economy far stronger than anyone predicted. Set out the details of our plan. Prime Minister did that at Lancaster House with a positive vision of post-Brexit Britain. Self-governing democracy, a strong European neighbour, including on trade and security, but also a global leader when it comes to free trade. And that led to the third thing that needed to happen, which is to develop a bit more unity of purpose, not just amongst the politicians, but amongst the country at large. And that's why the YouGov poll following the Lancaster House speech was very interesting, showing 3-1 the British public backed Theresa May's vision. And I think it's a very positive one.
What I want to get to is the nature of this economic vision for the future, because you talk about public opinion. I just wonder whether you believe that those Brexit voters, let's talk about a particular place in the UK, Stoke-on-Trent, in the sort of North Midlands of the UK, where there's actually, interestingly, a by-election soon. 70% of people in that constituency voted Brexit. But do you think that most of those 70% wanted to see a deregulation?
Point is the vision of what we want, the ambition, the House speech, I spelt out the principles. Of course, if we don't get a deal, we're absolutely right to do some contingency planning and say, look, even if the EU applies...
And you think that's what the British people voted for, do you?
Even if the EU...
Your vision of where Britain's economy should go.
Let me finish. Even if the EU applies its external tariff, which would mean on average 3.6%, we would have to take some measures to make sure that Brexit, post-Brexit, the economy could still continue to thrive. And one of the things we'd obviously look is the question of tax and making sure we retained our competitiveness.
Well, not just tax, but public expenditure. You'd have to slash public spending much more than we've seen
Well, actually,
thus far.
corporation tax has been on a downward trend. Why? Because we want Britain to be competitive. That's what attracts the investment and that's what creates the jobs. But all of these, frankly, silly caricatures of Britain becoming the Singapore of the North Sea, I don't recognise those at all. Of course, though, we need to be braced. We need to go into these negotiations hoping for the best, but braced for any outcome. And that's the key point Philip Hammond was saying. And by the way, in terms of, you talked about hard Brexit and were the British people up for it. Again, if you look at that YouGov poll, now, to the extent we can ever trust any polls again, but it showed strong public support for saying, actually, if the UK government didn't get a good deal, it shouldn't sign up to any terms that were offered from Brussels. So in that sense, I think the British public is, despite the frenzied, polarised media debate, getting behind quietly but confidently the Prime Minister's position.
Taking us dangerously back to the cliff edge, and we've done the cliff edge, so let's not go back to the cliff edge. Let's actually, I want a couple of specific answers from you, and then I want to look at the big international picture of where Britain sits in the world. But on the specifics, what happens to the 3 million or so EU nationals who are living and working in the UK today? I'm very confused by mixed signals from the government. What will happen to them?
Well, look, I made clear during the referendum campaign, anyone legally here from the EU at the time of the referendum, I think, should have their legal rights protected.
So they can stay indefinite. Whatever new rules apply to those who aren't here, who might want to come here, those people already here will be able to stay indefinitely.
I think as a moral position, but also showing good faith in these negotiations, it is absolutely the right thing to do.
So what do you think of Theresa May's position in moral terms when she refuses to give the cast iron guarantee that you've just given and says, oh, well, our stance on those people will depend on how our nationals, UK citizens, are treated in mainland Europe?
Well, I think we should fight very hard for our expats, but I understand why Theresa May is saying, actually, I would like to get those two issues dealt with in the round. And what she tried to do, and what the government tried to do, and what it did do, is go to Brussels and say, hey, why can't we just have an early agreement and put out of their anguish and their anxiety European nationals based in the UK and UK nationals based in the EU. And remember, it was the EU that said we can't get agreement amongst the other 27 for this. It was them that said this will have to wait till March.
Do you think
we tried to do the right thing?
Do you think some Brexit backers, voters in towns like Boston and Lincolnshire, who have consistently, according to the polls and anecdotal evidence, said that their town feels as though it has, in a sense, they've lost their own culture and identity because so many East European farm workers are currently living in that town. Do you think they will feel a little disappointed, let down, if you're saying to them, well, actually, the status quo as it currently exists in Boston, Lincolnshire will have to remain?
Well, certainly not with me or any of the people, for example, in the Vote Leave campaign, because we all said that we didn't think it was right, as a basic point of moral ethics, to start deporting en masse people that have been here for a long period of time, have played by the rules, obeyed the law and worked hard. So I think it was quite clear in terms of what we said during the referendum, but it's quite right to try and secure those rights for British expats abroad too.
OK, another quick specific point about hard borders. It seems, and the Scottish nationalists are very disappointed with the government stance, that the government isn't interested in discussing with the Scots Nats the idea that Scotland could remain somehow in the single market and in the European Customs Union. But there is a question of whether in Ireland and possibly in Scotland too, there will, if the Scots got their way, there would be a hard border between those nations of the United Kingdom and England. Will there be a hard border?
In terms of with Scotland, it would be, I think, wrong as a matter of principle and impossible to enforce. In terms of with Ireland, we've got the common travel area. Those arrangements existed before we were even members of the EEC as it then was. And of course, there's going to be strong bilateral relations to make sure we don't undermine taking back control over our immigration policy, but without putting up a hard border between the two.
Forgive me, but I'm not clear. If Ireland is in the single market and the customs union and the UK is not, how can there not be a hard border?
We'll have to have sensible mutual arrangements which respect both sides of that debate. Now, we had that before we entered the EU, so I don't think it's beyond the wit of man or woman to come up with sensible arrangements, but we're not going to erect a hard border. We said that during the referendum campaign, the government says it now. Equally, frankly, some of the stuff coming from the SNP is, I don't think, very credible, and it's not just the UK government saying that. The EU has said, look, some of these ideas about you staying in the single market, we had the referendum as one country, and once you do that, you then negotiate your international relations as one country too.
Let's now look at the international context in which this is all taking place. On June 23rd, the British people voted. At the time, Barack Obama was President of the United States. Well, of course, today, Donald Trump is in the White House, and the noises coming out of the White House are very, very different. Do you think it makes sense for Britain to be cutting its bonds and ties with the European Union at a time when the United States is being led by a man who is avowedly and proudly nationalist in his economics and his politics?
Well, look, first of all, we're not leaving Europe, we're leaving the EU, and we want to remain a good European neighbour. And I think from Theresa May's visit to Washington, you can see even now how that influence can play out, the opportunity for our European friends, for Britain exercising its leverage. Because if you look at what Theresa May said both about not being naive about Vladimir Putin, or what she said about the importance of all NATO allies, America included, standing with Britain behind our NATO commitments, that's a good example of where we can exercise leverage. But Britain wants an independent foreign policy, and that means being independent, and to be an independent, self-governing democracy. That means independent from the EU, but also we're going to have a strong special relationship with America, but with good friends. With good friends, you exercise
a really, really special relationship with Donald
good
Trump's
friends.
America,
Well,
are we? I mean, it's interesting because Theresa May pointed in that direction. She said to Trump, looking at him, she said, "You renew your nation just as we renew ours. The opportunity to renew the special relationship for this new age is here. A chance," she said, "for post-EU Britain and Trump's America to," quote, this is her quote, "to lead together again." Do you really think that Britain, at this particular moment in global politics and particularly US politics, is in a position and wants to have that special bond with Donald Trump's America?
Well, look, the special relationship endures and is far bigger than any figure in either number 10 Downing Street or in the White House. We've got close relationships on trade, on culture, on values, and on things like security, from the intelligence relationship to NATO. Absolutely right. We don't throw our toys out of the pram because of a controversial new president. We will double up on engaging. And what you saw...
Do you think the British public liked the fact that when Donald Trump issued this executive order banning incomers from 7 mostly Muslim countries, Angela Merkel was on the phone within hours suggesting to the president that this was a big problem and that he should remember what international law says. Theresa May, she was asked about it, she obfuscated, she didn't address it directly, she didn't want to condemn the Americans. Do you think the British public like where we are today?
That is a total caricature of the position. If you look at the 2 days of Theresa May over in Washington, yes, we want to grasp the opportunities around free trade, and it's great that we've got an American president who wants to do a free trade deal. At the same time,
this is a president who's avowedly a protectionist and who says that everything he does will be about America first. What makes you think that Britain can cut a deal in Britain's interest when Donald Trump is so fanatically in favour of pursuing only America's interest?
Stephen, all the more the coup it was to be in there first and get that commitment from him. And secondly,
what commitment?
The commitment to expedite and have proper working level arrangements towards a free trade deal. Well, it'll be
on his terms.
Stephen, come on.
Have you read The Art of the Deal? Donald Trump says the art of the deal is all about...
I'm happy to answer questions, or you can, but you need to wait for the answers, right? So, first of all, on trade, that must be a good thing. But when it comes to delivering difficult messages, Theresa May did it in public on NATO, on Russia, and by the time she got home, yes, there was this furore around the executive order. I don't agree with it. I think it was wrong. I think it was divisive. But because she'd been for 2 days in Washington, because we're engaging, Boris Johnson got on the phone and it was very clear, not just for Britain, but I think it will be for the other countries, that dual nationals coming from Britain will not be barred from going to the US. That's serious statesmanship, Stephen. Not the throwing up your hands in despair, not the flouncing off the Labour Party's position under Jeremy Corbyn that somehow we should boycott or snub Donald Trump, but you engage to take advantage of the opportunities, but also to deliver the candid advice of a friend, and that is what Theresa May did.
In The Art of the Deal, Donald Trump says that whether you win or lose in any deal is all about the leverage you have. When you talk about Britain in a post-Brexit future dealing with Trump's America, or indeed Xi Jinping's China, or indeed Modi's India, all of them in their different ways, nationalist leaders out to protect what their nation's interest is, where do you think the leverage lies? How much leverage has Britain got?
Well, Stephen, there you go again. There's a classic BBC doing down Britain. Let's be clear. You are fifth biggest economy in the world, sixth biggest military in the world, the common English language, the language of international, the language of business, the birthplace of Shakespeare, of Newton. We've got huge things going for us. The network of Commonwealth links we've got, and you're right. We've got to go into these negotiations, whether it's with China, whether it's with Brazil, whether it's with America, doing what normal countries do, which is to look after the British national interest. But often that will be looking for a win-win. Free trade is good for Britain.
I asked you how much leverage Britain has, and your answer included Shakespeare. I mean, is that...
No, you were asking about Britain as a nation. I wanted to show why we're not quite as down on our luck as you're implying. And actually, we've got huge both economic power, military hard power, but also the soft power, which is why Shakespeare and language and culture and values comes into it. But at the end of the day, you're right, we're the fifth biggest economy in the world. We're not the biggest economy in the world. But actually, free trade is win-win. Good for Britain, jobs, cheaper prices in the stores, but also good for America for precisely the same reasons. And by the way, it's not just about those big countries. What about the global economy? What about the poorest countries in sub-Saharan Africa? Free trade would give them a lifeline opportunity to gather and gain real, genuine independence. Actually, it's a great mission for post-Brexit Britain in the 21st century.
And all those business leaders who say that they're having to revisit and review their plans for presence in the UK because of the uncertainty around Brexit, your message is...
Since the Brexit vote, from Dyson to JCB to Apple to Facebook, we've had a whole string of major international companies who have pledged fresh investment into the UK. We had Weetabix only this week. I'm a big fan of Weetabix, but it's a really interesting company.
And many companies, including Weetabix, interestingly, are saying that their prices have gone up because of the weakness of the pound, because of the post-Brexit economic situation, and the consumer will have to pay. And that's something you're going to have to explain to your voters.
I'll be accountable to my voters in the normal way. Huge opportunities, as Mervyn King has said, for Britain to export more. But you're right to say that there will be inflationary pressures, and we do need to keep an eye on those, and the Bank of England has got the tools to keep that under control. But let's be realistic, Stephen. Inflation is 1.6%. It's still well below the Bank of England's target rate. So I don't think that gives you objective grounds for quite some of the pessimism that you're pervading here.
We have to end there. Dominic Raab, thanks for being on Hard Talk. Thank you very much indeed. Goodness.